On this edition of Up Close, he led Nebraska to 3 titles in his last 5 years, is the only man to retire as reigning national champion. Hall of Famer Tom Osborne tells us about running the Big Red Machine for a quarter century, why he wanted Frank Solich to succeed him in Lincoln, and faith in the game. Tom Osborne, Up Close.
From the ESPN studios in Los Angeles, here's Gary Miller.
Hi again, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Up Close. We're very pleased to welcome in Tom Osborne to the show, the longtime Nebraska head coach, quarter century in Lincoln as head coach, 36 years overall. That's quite a legacy. Do you feel like, we look at you on the list, and you're right there at the top, retired as the winningest active coach at your time. Do you feel like a living legend, like you're one of the great coaches of all time?
Well, not really. I think sometimes, Gary, you're so close you can't see the forest for the trees. And, I also remember losing 7 straight bowl games. I remember some losses to Oklahoma, and so we had some really great success toward the end. But there were some times when it wasn't so good, but I had great help. I had some great staff, and of course they're still doing a great job. All those guys stayed, and that's been very gratifying to me.
25, all those years, you were in a bowl game every year, even if it was the Blue Bonnet Bowl, which no longer exists. Can you imagine what a season would have been like not to go to a bowl game?
Well, it would have been a little rough because we had a couple 9-3 seasons where, they weren't about to fire us, but they weren't very pleased. And so I think with Bob Devaney's success, we kind of painted ourselves into a corner where a good year is probably 11 wins and a 10-win season is just kind of average.
Well, in your book, Faith in the Game, you quote a lot of famous coaches, philosophers, the Bible, everything. But one of the guys who's been a major influence on you, who's quite an author in his own right, is John Wooden. We had him up close, and we talked to him about winning. And we mentioned, when you and I were talking before the show, what a legacy. I mean, no one will probably ever touch his winning percentage in the years that he put together. And I asked him about that. I said, how could winning not be important to you? And here's what he said.
I wanted winning to be a byproduct of the preparation and of other things. I think getting there, I tried to teach, like Cervantes said, the road is better than the end. To me, practicing was the important thing. That's the teaching. I would like to, if game time come, I'd like to go up in the stands and watch and see if I did a good job of teaching.
How big an influence has he been to you?
Well, John Wooden was a huge influence. I read one of his books early in my coaching career, I think maybe before I became head coach, and I noticed that he said that he never mentioned winning to his players, and I don't believe that I ever did either. I really tried to focus on the process. The idea was that if you did the right things every day, and the drill work was good, and the fundamentals were sound, and the attitude was right, that the winning would take care of itself. And so we really focused more on the process of getting ready to play, and that was the most important thing.
You told me something interesting about the piece of John Wooden memorabilia you have.
Yeah, I've got a basketball signed by John Wooden, and I purchased it for $500. That's the only piece of memorabilia that I've ever bought, but I've really admired greatly all of his accomplishments, and particularly the kind of person that he is and was.
You mentioned in the book, and also in your final news conference, but certainly since you'd made the decision to quit coaching, you said, I miss it. And never say never. Is there any circumstance under which you would coach again?
Well, I think, Gary, the odds are very, very slim that I would ever do that. I guess there might be something that would happen, but I'm 99.9% certain that I will not do that again. That's a closed chapter as far as I'm concerned right now. I certainly miss coaching, and the thing I miss about it, I miss the players, I miss the coaches, I miss the strategy. I don't necessarily miss some of the other parts of it, but the relationships were very powerful.
You mentioned I don't necessarily miss other parts. What do you miss the least?
Well, I think the inflexibility of it. We would start August 1st, and we would work probably 14, 15, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for about 6-7 straight months. And that was a little bit difficult in that you just never had a day off, and it was a little bit tough on your family. And so at least now I'm continuing to work. I haven't retired and just go fishing, but at least occasionally I can spend a day with my wife or do something that's important to our family. And So that's the part that I think has been gratifying.
You quote Bo Schembechler in a book as well, and in his book he said, "Take a good last look." What was that last year like, and what were those last looks like?
Well, it was interesting to me because most people didn't know that was going to be the last year until sometime in December. But I remember every stadium we went to, every team we played, I'd think, well, this is the last time I'm going to do this. And so it was kind of a bittersweet thing. I savored the moment a little bit more. I focused on the environment and took greater note of the facilities and the fans and the players. And yet to realize that was the last go-around was sometimes difficult, too.
In your last year, you go back to Columbia, so you think of all the years that usually you whipped Missouri, but you go back there, and that year, as you're headed towards another undefeated season and on your way to a national championship, you couldn't possibly, in pregame looking around and taking in the sights, predicted what would have happened in that game, and that play in particular.
Well, it was a 1 in a million, 1 in a 10,000 shot, so we were very, very fortunate, and usually most teams that win a national championship or go undefeated or tie for a national championship or whatever, at some point along the way have to have some pretty good fortune. And last year Tennessee, was in pretty bad shape with Arkansas, and then Arkansas fumbled the ball and Tennessee went in and scored. And so generally it has to happen, but that was probably the most fortunate play we've ever experienced. And we had some the other way against Oklahoma in the 70s. There were 2 or 3 times we thought we had them beat and they would pull off an unbelievable play. But I guess in a sense it evened out with the Missouri game. You mentioned in the book that maybe as famous a game, and you were on the losing end, was the '84 Orange Bowl and the 2-point conversion that you went for, and how that changed a lot of lives. In what way? Well, I think that people perceived it 2 different ways. Some people said, well, the guy should have kicked the point. He can't win the big one. He's a loser, whatever. And then I think some perceived it as the way to go. That if you're playing for a national championship, you try to win it. And we'd had a great year. Nobody come real close to us. We had a tremendous offensive football team, and yet we came up short against a very good team playing in Miami. So, and that kind of set the stage because we had a lot of tough times with Miami in Miami, which a lot of people did. But at any rate, it was a memorable game. It's one that I'll never forget. You mentioned that a lot of those games that year weren't close. Nebraska football was notorious for, against a lesser opponent, just annihilating them. Was there ever a game where you were embarrassed by how badly you beat a team? Well, we had one game up in Minneapolis where we scored 84 points, and they ended up with 20 or something like that. But their approach was they were going to blitz every play. I think they felt that in order to stay with us, they were going to have to do that. So if they guessed right, we lost 2 yards. If they guessed wrong, we scored a touchdown. Because, in option football, when you're committing your linebackers, you're dead if you go the wrong way. And so it got out of hand, and we ended up actually playing our second team in the second quarter. But we ended up putting our first team back in the fourth quarter, which made a lot of people mad. But they didn't realize that our second team was tired because they played the second and third quarter, and they were running out of gas. And but that was a weird game. Yeah, running up and down the field, they got winded. Yeah. We'll talk more about the health issues for you. We got a lot more to get to with Tom Osborne as we continue Up Close. We'll talk about faith in the game. Welcome back to Up Close as we continue with Hall of Famer, Nebraska head coach, the former head coach, Tom Osborne. And Tom, we showed the Missouri game. That game could give almost anyone a heart attack. But during that game, right after it, you started to experience fatigue, and then the Iowa State game, you ended up being hospitalized after that. How big a factor was the health issue for you in retiring? Well, I think the health issue was sort of the exclamation point. I had made some commitments that I felt I had to honor, and yet I was hoping somehow, some way, that I wouldn't have to do that. And, I was trying to rationalize, and then I had atrial fibrillation, which is where the upper chamber of your heart beats irregularly, and it's not life-threatening, but it takes away a lot of your energy, and it's probably not a great thing to have.